the state of democracy and the judiciary. I'll speak first on the state of democracy. Today, it is well known that the extreme right has captured power in several major states, particularly in India, in the United States, in Turkey, in Brazil. And as Suresh has said, it's not just, I think, the attacks that are of concern. I would say that neoliberalism of an extreme kind is combined with authoritarian methods. And as Ijaz Ahmad has said in an interview, the most authoritarian thing is capital. And I think you can see that very well in the United States, India, Turkey, and of course in Brazil. And there are also other countries where this is the case, even in the UK to some extent. One of the things we must realize is that the commonalities between liberalism and the extreme right. This is a point that is particularly emphasized by Ijaz Ahmad. A book is being brought out called India, Liberal Democracy and the Extreme Right. It's just been recently published by Nava Telangana Press. And these are basically two long essays plus an interview already published, but I think it's a good thing to bring it out, where he makes the point, and I think that's very, very important. Otherwise, I think we will have illusions, that he starts out by examining the claim made by Indian liberalism. The claim is that our republic, the Indian Republic, as governed by our Republican Constitution, is grounded in such a structurally elaborate and ideologically hegemonic liberal democratic framework, institutional framework, that all political forces of all hues, are forced to consent to this framework. Claim that is the liberal democratic institutional framework is so strong that whether you are left of center or right of center or extreme right, everybody has to consent to this framework. And you have to play by the electoral democratic rules. And everybody, therefore, whatever they say when they contest elections, when they're out of power and want to get in, once they come into power, they gravitate towards the political center. And this exercise of power is moderated by powerful liberal democratic institutions. Ijaz Ahmad says you have to take this claim seriously because there is some evidence for this. But as against this claim, if you examine the basic trajectory of Indian politics over the past quarter century, and specifically between 1990 and 2015, according to him, you come to two theses. First is, it is not so much the right that moves closer to the center, although they may make some tactical concessions, but it's the liberal center that moves further and further to the right. That's the first proposition. Secondly, there is a historically unprecedented ongoing process. The seemingly unstoppable rise of the extreme right to dominance in various areas of national life: culture, society, education, ideology, economy. They make a formal, often fraudulent, commitment to observe all the institutional norms of liberal democracy. So there is quite a literature globally also. There are books on this subject, that you don't have to throw out all the so-called liberal democratic forms or institutional forms. What you do is you can exploit them by undermining the content and the spirit of those institutions as governed by, say, a Republican constitution such as we have in India. Perfectly fine, the constitution. All of us will accept it with whatever shortcomings it has. But what happens is these authoritarian forces, and there is no question, no doubt, that the RSS is one of the most authoritarian organizations in the world. Whether it is their own organization or how they have waited for a very long period to capture these institutions, they certainly have a strategy, and that strategy should not be underestimated. They are willing to play the long game, wait, however long it takes. Today, what has happened is capturing state power not through what they call frontal seizure, as we see in revolutions or counter-revolutions, but from within. And what Ijaz Ahmed calls, I think it's a very fine phrase, a long march through the institutions. And the institutions, you push through them, and it's a long march. And it is engineered and legally legitimate as held by the judiciary, internal seizure of these institutions by its personnel while keeping the institution intact formally on the outside. And this goes hand in hand with, I think the Indian case study panna, with unleashing sporadic large-scale violence. Once in a while, you unleash large-scale violence, but more frequently, you unleash low-intensity violence. அதுதான் the attacks on Muslims in Delhi, elsewhere. Gujarat pogrom was unleashing large-scale violence. And before that also there have been some incidents. I'm not going to that. But so it goes along, state capturing the institutions, whether it is the Election Commission or the CAG or the CBI or the Enforcement Directorate or the Income Tax Department and several other institutions like that. You undermine the institutions while keeping the external form intact. So you do it through a certain process which has to be certified as legal, provided the judiciary is of the kind we have today. One of the advantages in India has been in the past, I think Prashant Bhushan has made it very clear, even in the in the contempt case, that he has respect for the judiciary, and it is only his agony, his deep disappointment and grief, if you like, over what has happened to the judiciary over the last several years. He himself, he's best qualified to speak on that even today. That is what is bothering us, because the judiciary could have been a check on this. And Suresh has already mentioned major cases of whether it is Kashmir or the CAA or the electoral bonds issue or other issues, habeas corpus, and so on. The judiciary has, its performance has been very disappointing on the whole. It has, you can say, and people like Justice A.P. Shah and others have been quite blunt in stating that the judiciary has been intolerant, that the judiciary has let us down. As against it, you have self-certification by the Supreme Court of India in this judgment, in the Prashant Bhushan case, which convicted him of contempt and sentenced him to 1 rupee. And this is the claim that we are the central pillar on which Indian democracy stands. This is not what the Constitution says. The judiciary is not the central pillar. There is a separation of powers. The judiciary has, the whole power of judicial review has developed over time, but it is not the central pillar of it's a constitution that is supreme, and judiciary, this is a self-certification and a claim that is highly arguable, that in my opinion is not true, but this is the basis on which they go on to convict, show their intolerance in this particular case. So I think that is the first thing that has to be questioned or even challenged when they say that if you say anything against our authority, we're not openly saying that we have Tamil Van Alavi Adhigaram, the sky high powers. A speaker of the Tamilnadu Legislative Assembly some decades ago said, I have sky high powers, எனக்கு வான் அளாவிய அதிகாரம் இருக்கு, and went on to free speech was assailed under that umbrella. Today, if you go by the judgment like this, using Article 129 for the Supreme Court and 215, I believe, for the High Courts, some sections of the judiciary at the highest level are virtually claiming sky-high powers where they themselves are the judge. They are involved. Any so-called offense against them, they are the judge, they are the jury, they convict, and there is no appeal. Several issues arise out of this, but I think had we had a judiciary of the kind we've had in the past, at least some years in some periods in the past, when we had judges like Justice Khanna, judges like Justice Krishna Iyer, and various others. I don't have the full list. I think it could have been a check on this and a check that will serve democracy very well. This is a big weakness in the Indian system in the fight against democracy, the fight for democracy. But there is, as Suresh said, also ground for hope, reason for hope. First, let me say on the question of contempt. I had a conversation with Prashant after that, and both of us agreed that this very unjust decision, although it is only 1 rupee, there's a conviction. And what it led was, it proved counterproductive from the standpoint of those who want to exercise this kind of absolutist power, to punish for anything that is critical. Anything when somebody challenges you, when somebody criticizes you, when somebody says you're not doing your job, and somebody says that why are you not providing better access to the poorest, the most oppressed, the most deprived sections of your society? They say that you're questioning the authority of the Supreme Court, or you're scandalizing the court, and they come down heavily on it, at least in words. And today, I think, contrary to them getting away with it, you see there's a fight back, there's a pushback. Suresh mentioned what is happening on CAA. We also saw that. Before that, people came out very boldly, not just Muslims who felt more threatened than the rest. A lot of people came out, students came out, at least the early part of the protest before we had the pandemic. But on the contempt issue itself, as soon as the judgment was delivered, a lot of the bar, as well as a number of journalists, began to look very closely at the record of Justice Arun Mishra. The example here is an article by senior advocate Sriram Panchu in Bar and Bench called Justice Arun Mishra, an Assessment. This article is, I think, a very powerful examination, analysis, and indictment of how he has virtually ruined the Supreme Court. He's used very, very strong language here, but well substantiated. I think a brilliant article on this. And also there have been in publications like The Wire, in Frontline, in Scroll, in Quint, number of articles, and also in the Live Law and the Bar and Bench, a number of articles looking into their record about particular cases, whether conflicts of interest were involved, did you act properly, did you follow the norms, judicial norms, and so on. And so this is opened up, you can say, a Pandora's box of scrutiny and close examination of what is happening. And this, I think, is an example of a democratic pushback or fight back. That this is not what they would have wanted. This is not what the judiciary, which claims to be the central pillar on which democracy rests, wants. And hearteningly, independent of this perhaps, there have been some good judgments of the high courts. And I'm sure the Supreme Court also, we will see this more and more often. One is the judgment of the Allahabad High Court on Dr. Kafil Khan's speech. He was detained for several months. They have said that his speech calls for national integrity and unity and does not instigate violence or hatred. And he was freed. this was, I think, a very encouraging or heartening judgment because they looked at the facts. They went for the truth. Another fine example is the judgment of the Aurangabad bench of the High Court of Bombay on the Tabligi, particularly the foreigners who came to there. And there the media have been criticized also for demonizing people, innocent people who came here. And these are examples. And also I think the decision of the, in the Madras High Court of Madras on the contempt case against Surya, several former judges took a stand. Some advocates, I think, took the wrong side on this because they are also involved in this. But I think at the end of the day, but I must also place on record our appreciation of the stand taken by the Attorney General for India. And here, the Advocate General in Tamil Nadu, Mr. K.K. Venugopal, whom I've known for more than about 50 years, took a very good stand on this question. He didn't want any punishment. He didn't want the case to be pursued. And similarly, it just happened that his nephew, Sir Vijay Narayan, Advocate General here, refused sanction and so on. Mr. Venugopal also deserves a lot of appreciation for refusing sanction to proceed against Swara Bhaskar, the actor Swara Bhaskar, for contempt of court. I was in that meeting where she spoke in Mumbai Collective, where I think there are many voices for democracy. And so I think there are heartening signs of resistance. But unless you break the fear of the majoritarian movement, it's not just repression, I think, that people are afraid of. They think that we are going against those who have won sovereignty. They only got 37% of the vote this time, earlier 31% in 2014. But they seem to have a dominant majority. And given the fact that state rights have been eroded, given the fact that the parliamentary norms are being subverted, I think this fear that it's a hopeless fight, I can't stand up against this juggernaut, and so on, I think you have to break that fear. That fear has to be broken. And we saw spontaneous resistance, even by students against CAA, but it could not be sustained. That is a fact. Spontaneous movements can take us only thus far. After that, you have to organize it. And I know that Suresh and others are involved in that. And Prashant Bhushan himself, it doesn't rely on spontaneity. His movement he was one of the founders and most active and distinguished members of this movement for judicial accountability. I think you've got to sustain this movement. And on the side of the media also, I think there are some heartening signs of resistance for free speech. A number of editorials appeared in the press on the contempt case. There was fairly good coverage, at least initially, of the anti-CAA protests. There has been sharp criticism of the judiciary. And I already mentioned the articles, investigative articles on the record of Justice Arun Mishra. Of course, you can do it after a person retires more easily than you do it when they're sitting there. So I think these are heartening signs, but unless we realize that the extreme right has captured power here, there's no need for any illusions about what they represent. They want, if possible, they want to function within the existing institutions to capture them. And Suresh, I think, gave examples of how they are now breaching even that, breaching the walls and trying to, ride roughshod over these institutions blatantly in an open way, such as what happened on the Farmers' Bill. I heard Derek O'Brien explain what happened and evidence and so on, what happened in the Rajya Sabha. So I think we are at a crossroads on this issue. And I didn't say too much about the judiciary, but we have some experience in the past. During the Bofors investigation, when the CBI demanded all the documents that I had, they didn't file an FIR against the accused at that time, against those we alleged were involved in corruption. it was the Madras High Court that gave a stay that unless you register a criminal case against the accused, a citizen or a journalist did not have, was not obligation to hand over the evidence that you had, which helped us very much in that case. And there are many such examples. And even on the Rafale case, to some extent, freedom of speech was, they said it was stolen documents, but I think we were protected on that count and so on. So there are examples of freedom of the press itself was read into the Constitution by judicial interpretation, because it's not mentioned in Article 19 as a separate fundamental right. It's under freedom of speech and expression, and so on. So I think there are these heartening signs, but we must not underestimate the forces of the extreme right. வலதுசாரி தீவிரவாதிகள், அதுதான் முன்னால் இருக்கக்கூடிய சவால். அவங்க இந்த democratic, parliamentary democratic forms, liberal democratic forms பயன்படுத்துவார்கள். ஆனா ரொம்ப நாள் அது வழியா அவங்க வேலை செய்யறது கஷ்டம். அதை உடைத்து அதை தூக்கி எறிந்துதான் இருப்போம். நான் அந்த ஃபேஷிசமா இல்ல அந்த சர்ச்சைக்கு அந்த விவாதத்துக்கு இன்னைக்கு போக தேவையில்லை. பட் தே ஆர் எக்ஸ்ட்ரீம் அத்தாரிட்டேரியன் தீவிரவாதிகள், வலதுசாரி தீவிரவாதிகள். அவங்க தான் நம் முன்னால் நின்று நமக்கு ஒரு பெரிய தீமையை கொண்டு வரக்கூடிய ஒரு சூழ்நிலை இன்றைக்கு ஏற்பட்டிருக்கிறது. இந்தியாவில் மட்டும் இல்லை, வேறு சில முக்கியமான நாடுகளில் அதே போக்கு தான் இருக்கிறது. Trump has even said that if he loses the election, he may not accept the result. இந்தியாவில் இது வரைக்கும் அந்த அளவுக்கு வரல. இங்க இருக்கக்கூடிய இதுல there are many discussions in the US on how to remain in power even after you lose, even in the electoral college, not just the popular vote. அதனால this is a dangerous trend, and it is part of an international global trend, and we cannot forget that capital is the most authoritarian thing, and neoliberalism is often is combined deeply with these authoritarian ways. வெறும் attack on democracy மட்டும் இல்ல, attack on all aspects of life in a country. That is the challenge we face. அதுதான் நம்ம இருக்கக்கூடிய பெரிய சவால். ஸோ இந்த கூட்டத்தை, இந்த விவாதத்தை ஆர்கனைஸ் பண்ணவங்களுக்கு என்னுடைய பாராட்டுகள் and நன்றி. And of course now the most important speech perhaps or reflections perhaps will come now. We're all eager to hear Prashant Bhushan. I just want to say I greatly admired both the constructive spirit in which he approached this whole question, as well as the highly principled way in which he handled the whole affair. It was, I think, a textbook case of how to respond to intolerance, to authoritarianism, within the to unreasonable demands, to unjust demands. He did not spoil, he was not spoiling for a fight. It was very clear where when he had made, he said he had a mistake when he said that on the motorcycle, I didn't see that the motorcycle was on a stand. So the Chief Justice did not need to wear a helmet. So I regret that. He himself said before anyone asked. But when it came to what his senior counsel Rajiv Dhawan said, an attempt to get a coarse apology, he said that it will be contempt against my conscience. And I think all of democratic India, all progressive people in the country, I think, who followed it, would have appreciated it. It resonated across India because he was not just spoiling for a fight. He was extremely constructive, at the same time principled, and that sincerity is what people, I think, most admire. And if you sustain this kind of resistance, I'm sure that we can overcome this threat.